Hey everyone, and welcome to another Fireside chat with the digital engineering team here at Abley. Today we've got myself, Hamish, Todd and Gavin, and we're going to have a chat about how we have internally developed a range of custom transformers to automate and manage Arcgis Online and portal and enterprise administration.
So what we're talking about is Esri Arcgis Online was a problem child for us. In 2013, Abley got its first version of Arcgis Online, and we used it as a bit of a playpen. And we put lots and lots of things in it, tried lots of things over a number of years, and everything was going swimmingly because we didn't really use it for anything.
Which is pretty common.
Yes.
I would say like most organizations when they're just throwing stuff in there, let's do some cool stuff and then move on.
And it's both their dev and production environment. You know, you've got something that's being served out to a client on one side, and then, you know, in the same folder you've got something that's being worked on in dev, and sharing and security can be all over the show.
Yeah, and from our perspective, no one was looking after it. So everybody was just, doing what they felt like. That wasn't a problem, didn't really care too much. There was no production going ahead in it. So it was a case of out of sight, out of mind. That's until we started burning through our credits. We were allowed a certain amount of credits we were getting. In the last couple of years, we started chewing through them really quickly because, you know what? Someone who added something back in 2013 and as a test had never gone back and deleted it. So we were just building up. And so there came a point when we actually had to start managing it.
And bear in mind that everything you have on AGOL to some extent burns credits, and some more so. Storing a web map's pretty basic.
It's cheap. It's cheap, very cheap.
Very low credit usage, but things like geocoding.
Yeah, I was going to say
massive.
Yeah, like what's an example of one that blast off where?
Well, I mean,
geocoding or reverse geocoding.
Yeah. Do we have a specific?
But I mean, even if we're storing, New Zealand's not very big.
Yeah.
So we've got national data sets, and chucking those up on Arcgis Online doesn't cost much by themselves. But if you've got 30 or 40 layers of national data sets that cover, things like the roads, the parcels, and all that sort of stuff, the lots, you're starting to accumulate a whole bunch of storage. Yeah. And from that, we did pretty well. We got up to about 4,000 items. So an item being a item within Arcgis Online. And we were burning through those credits, so that was going well.
And something
if we're going to burn through them,
something that I also, now that I'm thinking about it, could align it with is both the growth of the company as with more people, not only in our spatial side but also our transport side. As it's growing, we obviously have more people using it, but as the knowledge of what you can do with Arcgis Online has grown in the transport side, we're seeing a lot more of the people who typically have come into GIS and Esri through another means. They've been building web maps, surveys, and them not necessarily knowing some of the finer data management skills have been a problem, but it's also meant that we've now got upwards of 30 or 40 people who may regularly be using and creating items on AGOL.
And you did write about the idea that people don't necessarily know how to manage their data in it. So, these people had complete control of anything they wanted to do, and they went, to make that work, the easiest way I can make it work is to make it public, because then I don't need to worry about permissions or anything like that. So we did like 1,000 items that were public. Most called test or ABDF or, something random. But, it came to a point where we had to start managing it.
Yeah.
And
you could do that manually, but it would be a full-time job.
And that's where we started. So we started looking at trying to get it under control by manually editing it. And, you quickly realise when you've got so much debt there and trying to figure out who's done what, trying to figure that out is basically impossible when it gets to that side. And so we thought, well, how are we going to do this with a bit more ease? And, we're FME guys, so Esri's got a wonderful API in the background that you can utilise to do all sorts of things. So we thought, let's use the API and start figuring out how we're going to unravel ourselves out of this mess. And so the first scenario was we needed to be able to search for items. So, we've got 4,000 items, but how do we break that down? How do we get all the information around that? And so the first transformer that was ever built in this space by us was one to go and look at the Arcgis items and to be able to pull out who created it, what size it was, whose folder it was in, etc., etc., etc. And that was pretty, I'm going to say, difficult to do from the perspective of we actually needed to get to understand and know how the API worked and set up the processes that we were going to use in our transformers that worked with the Esri JavaScript API.
And not only that, but the structure of how Esri manages items and data within Arcgis Online. Because There's users, there's groups, and there's items. That's sort of your three main elements. And of course, a group can be an overarching, and a group can contain, correct me if I'm wrong, items and users.
Yep.
A user can own multiple items, but an item can only be owned by one user, but an item and a user can be in multiple groups.
Mm-hmm.
Can groups contain groups?
Groups can't contain
groups can't contain groups. So there's a big sort of structure that had to be understood, and just because we knew information about the items, you also had to know information about the groups if you wanted to pull some of that out, and then you had to know information about the user, this is getting pretty complex, but an item and a group can have a different sharing permission to a group. So it's a really complex structure that actually had to be understood, because some of these transformers, while they might say get item details, they may actually be making calls to get information about users and groups, and we've basically pulled all those often complex queries and relationships down into a simple single transformer that in the simplest form is you provide a, I'm thinking of the get users one, that you provide a connection file, and I think that's all you provide, and it goes off and it returns you
all the users and all the details and all that sort of stuff.
And then from there you can go and search items, see what groups they own or they're in, and it's all related, and it's almost, it's very FME in the fact that these transformers do very independent structured things.
Yes.
And it's simply a case of, I want to get to this point, what transformers do I have to connect and plug together to achieve my required output?
Yeah. And, one of the things that I suppose we looked at originally was, can we do this another way? Do we need to actually build this in FME? And we looked at things like GeoJob, and we looked at some other reporting interfaces. And in reality, because our needs meant, we could want to do any kind of thing in there, it actually made sense to build an FME. FME is the perfect place for it, because, building these little bespoke transformers that do one thing and one thing only means that we can create a whole bunch of them, and
in a sense, they're microservices that you're using. And listening to this, not having some of the background that you guys do over the years with Esri, it sounds a lot like some of the JSON connections in Smartsheets that I had to work with 2 years ago. Similar, child, parent, columns, options within the cells that you're selecting, but the format is similar.
Yes. And in reality, we've written, what we've got really good at is writing a wrapper for the Esri calls. And so we've got this wonderful wrapper that we've I'm going to say it's very bespoke, but very thorough. And
it's as simple now as changing the API that you call.
Yes.
And it returns something completely different. So I mean, what did I make the other day? I made something
Credits?
set the credits.
Set the credits.
So set the credits for an individual user. We had this framework, and you look at what the framework contains, and that's a good few hours worth of work just to build that, but days worth of thinking of the logic and how it all relates. But it probably took me half an hour to build a single transformer.
So maybe we could dive into some of these transformers that you're talking about. The one on the left is the one that sticks out to me because it's massive, right?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where I think as we get more ability to control some of the ports and stuff in the FME side, and a custom transformer will be able to do tidy it up a bit.
And so this one takes all the information from from a web map.
No.
Which
So
one's
this one will get all the data that is associated with an item. So when I say each item has data, it's not necessarily the features and stuff that sit underneath it, but it's just basically configurations and all sorts of stuff within the actual item. But I think, the one thing I use it for a lot is, as you'll see, I think it's about 5 or 6 ports down, is one that's classed as URL. So that basically fires back all the URLs that are used in things like a web map. So, I can pass it all my web maps, go and get the URL, and I'm not sure if it's up on the screen there, but there's another transformer that does checking of URLs to make sure that whatever they're valid and they still exist, whether they're internal or external, what securities across them. And so, that was actually one of the first things that we developed again, was to be able to figure out what web maps that actually had broken links inside of them. So if it had a broken link inside of it, who the hell was using it?
And another use case that I can think of something like that was quite a few years ago, this has been 3 or 4 years ago, ECAN, Environment Canterbury, updated their GIS server. And if we're building something in Canterbury Web Map that shows data in Canterbury, they have a great resource of imagery and other contextual layers, and we wanted to, I think this was for part of the Nectar earthquake rebuild, and we wanted to go through and find all our URLs that reference this old ECAN service and update them to the new one. We of course could have done it manually, and I think at the time we hadn't actually fully developed this, but used a similar process to pull down all the JSON that creates that web map, find it, and then replace it. So this is basically doing that, but wrapped into a really easy to use, much easier than the succinct, much easier than the process I ended up building, custom transformer.
Yeah. So on the screen we're looking at all these different transformers, and
that's only some of them.
Right. And that's where it goes back to the microservices concept.
Yes.
You're able to link them through and create basically a workspace that does whatever the function is that you're trying to pull out of the data. You may pull all the groups, the groups that are under your organization to get the items, and then you pass those items to find the data, and then the data and plug them all together. Yeah. And I believe there's another example that we've talked about, workspace we're using as an example for this.
Yeah, so I mean, this, it's not built like we'd normally build an FME thing, but it's just to show kind of an example. So this is actually looking at Arcgis Online. It could be our Esri portal. It doesn't matter because just based on the connection file. And in this Arcgis AP items transformer, the first one, we're actually doing a search for web maps underneath our organisation. And that's pulling out all the web maps, and the views one is really interesting because it's not documented in any Esri API stuff. It's actually from figuring out a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in the background to be able to see it. So that views one can tell you actually how many times a web map has been opened in this scenario.
Nice.
And that can be by days or months or anything, or tell you the user that has opened it. Again, something that's not in any front end in Esri.
So you could then take that and pump it into Excel,
Well,
or you could graph it, or Power BI, and something a lot more.
And you can actually start to look at the layers underneath it, because if you were looking at the layers there, passing that into that thing, you could look at how many requests each layer has had, which is, you know, saying how much is someone moving around and actually making calls to it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty funky. Again, on the data one, we've got up there, again, as I mentioned before, pulling out URLs in the scenario and then checking it. What you can't see, of course, is what the outputs of those URLs are from the screenshot. But it's all things like whether it failed to actually get the URL, because now that URL doesn't exist, so that could be your external parties that have shut down some stuff. It could also say it's a success that the item's actually secured and it's got a token in front of its security. Bunch of range of things like that.
Does it check whether it contains data? So do you get the data counts or anything through on it?
No, because if it was a case of that it's actually secured, it doesn't have any of the authentication to get through it.
Yeah.
But it'll tell you what type of authentication it's using. So if it's using an Esri token authentication, if it's using
federated portal or something,
if it's using a different type of authentication, whether it's whatever it's doing, basically. And so it gives us a great ability of seeing what is actually available, what is getting used internally, how everything works. So when you go to shut down that service on your oldest production server, you know actually what web maps are pointing at it.
Yeah.
So what's the future? Like, what are we doing in-house?
Well,
what are we doing
replicating the entire Arcgis API?
The future is that we're going to release a few of these.
Cool.
So we've already started doing that with the users and the groups.
Yep.
So we put them up on the Arcgis Hub, the FME Hub.
And I think we've got 4 up there. We've got a couple of
server
specific ones as well.
And
so I think one of them is to start and stop services.
And the other one's to get a token from a portal, Arcgis Online or server environment.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll put a few more up there. We're going to keep some of the goodies at home in terms of some of the ones like the data one, like the URL validator.
Yeah.
Some of those have got, I'm going to say, tens to hundreds of hours into them, because actually it's not the transformer that contains a lot of the smarts, it's actually figuring out how Esri actually works.
And of course the risk with that is that Esri might just go and change something and then it fall over, but let's hope that doesn't happen.
But what we want to get to is to have a gigantic library of these things that continue to grow. And really they've made our administration of these environments really simple, whether that be Arcgis Online or Esri Enterprise. And basically I get this process or some of these processes running all the time. I can then compare it to a whole bunch of other things, and I can find out week to week who's following our policies, who's where these projects are aligned to, who's using all our credits for storage, and be able to assign that correctly.
One of the really cool things that I think you've done that we've had set up on our Arcgis Online infrastructure is we've got a policy in place where we have to keep folders under our usernames, and they have to be annotated to match our internal job numbering. So, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I didn't build this, but if you add an item to that folder, every night or every other night, a process will run, and if that item doesn't have a tag of the job ID, an FME process will automatically add a tag to that item so that you can then search by tags and everything's all grouped. And there's other checks that you're putting in place as well, that the job number is actually a valid job number and follows the required format.
And that project, making sure that project hasn't been closed for 3 years and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so that's exactly right. So everything, because we didn't want to put the pressure on everyone to say they must tag every single item that they put into Arcgis Online.
Because the harder you make, the more stuff you put in place, the less likely people are going to be able to follow it. Then you're going to get upset users and
Yeah.
all of that. And the fact that you've been able to make it, I can just create a new job, ABC 1, 2, 3, and dump 20 items in there, not have to worry about tagging them, but I come back the next morning and they've all got the right tag on them.
Yes, yep. And it's only going to get bigger and better on some of the things we do internally as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the same thing any organisation could do.
Awesome. So that's a fantastic introduction to some of the stuff you guys are doing, and I'm assisting with where I can with Esri's administration type stuff with FME. We're going to we are going to drop the link to our FME Hub location where some of you can go out and check out these transformers. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to chat with you about what's going on in your organization and what your needs are. But this is Hamish, Todd, I'm Gavin with Abley Digital Engineering, and we'll catch you next time.